Digital transformation has been one of the big buzzwords in the last few years. Almost everyone in the tech industry has been talking about it extensively, but the term has taken a whole new meaning since the pandemic. So, what has changed? We'll find out in today's episode. Hi and welcome to Amp Up, a podcast by Amplifyre. I'm your host David and I'm joined by Dr. Gerald Kane, professor at the famous Boston College and co-author of the book The Transformation Myth, Leading Your Organization Through Uncertain Times. We'll be discussing today about how digital transformation has evolved and how companies can adapt in this era of continuous disruption. Welcome to the show, Gerald.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for taking the time for us here talking about this topic. So, COVID and digital transformation, two very big topics. You have analyzed quite a few cases actually in the past, right? You have written also books on digital transformation. I mean, especially Transformation Myth, the last one, is very much connected to COVID and how companies have dealt with this. So, what would you say? How are companies dealing with this era right now and continuous disruption in general?
So, we did pitch this book, The Transformation Myth, in March of 2020. We had already planned to talk to MIT Press about a follow-up to our first book, which is The Technology Fallacy, How People Are the Real Key to Digital Transformation, and I bet we'll get into some of that stuff. And then we realized in March of 2020 that the world was changing pretty quickly. And we said, what if we look at how companies adapt to COVID while we're going through this? And so we went from the course of March of 2020 to December of 2020. We pitched a book, researched, wrote it, and got it to press in time for September of 2021.
Oh, wow.
And on the one hand, I was inspired by how many how many of the leaders we talked to were stepping up and really leading their organizations in very bold and innovative ways. You had leaders, at least in the U.S., in the absence of strong political leadership, you had corporate leaders really stepping up and making their employees feel safe, ensuring that the company stayed afloat, pivoting very quickly to a remote environment, and in some ways being more successful than they were, at least in terms of short-term individual productivity, when they could go into the office. And then third, I was really impressed and surprised by the number of people, at least from a digital perspective, that saw the pandemic as a real opportunity for them, a real opportunity to push through changes they've wanted to do for a long time, a real opportunity to capitalize on it and take business advantage because of the changes that took place. That were forced upon us. They were looking at how their business could compete in that new environment, and the speed at which these executives were able to shift their thinking was pretty remarkable. Now, I would argue that it's too soon to say how companies are adapting, because I actually think we are only at the second phase of the digital transformation process that we're going through. In the book, we talk about it in three phases. The first is respond, and this was March and April of 2020, where companies just figured out, okay, how do we keep the lights on? How do we keep business going in this environment? And they responded to the threat. I would argue from about May of 2020 to now, we are going through a phase called recovering or regrouping. So we're figuring out what this new normal is, and we're figuring out where the opportunities lie. I think the biggest step is still to come, when companies worldwide can go back into the office full time if they choose to. When the pandemic is behind us, I actually think, and we call this the thrive phase, I actually think this is where the real innovation and the real disruption is going to take place, because you've had 2 years of companies ramping up their digital capabilities, and once, say, the gloves are off, and once they're not constricted by what they can do because of pandemic issues and supply chain issues and that's where you're going to see the real innovation take place. So I think we are looking at probably the most innovative, exciting, and disruptive period, I think, in any of our lifetimes coming up in the next 3 to 5 years, as far as business disruption goes.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very interesting perspective on it. I mean, very often when people think about COVID and digital transformation, they think, okay, everything is happening right now. Right now is the big change that really disrupts the whole planet. But I mean, the way how we are putting it is, we are actually just at the beginning of it. Yeah. So actually, we just have seen what different potential is there, what different opportunities are there. And in order to actually materialize it, to work on it, well, we need to come out of the shock phase, as I understand, right?
Yes, and so we need to get to a point where we can do things. When we do get back to new normal and what that new normal is, I think we still don't know yet. And it's going to be different for different companies. Just the talent reshuffling alone. Whether companies decide to go fully virtual, hybrid, or fully in person is going to have a huge impact on the type of people they can attract. And different people there's no wrong or right answer here, yet the decision is going to have a massive impact on the future of your organization. And I would argue, if you are not thinking about this now as executives, you really you should be, because that is probably going to be the most momentous strategic decision that many executives will make over the next year. It's going to change the future of the organization. And again, there's not a right or a wrong necessarily. It's about what's going to work best for your strategic goals of your organization. If you're not thinking about that and what the implications are going to be, I think it's a real mistake to just either assume you're going to carry on with the way things have gone, assume you're going to go back to the way things were. Any of those assumptions, I think it's wrong to just assume, rather than do a very careful strategic analysis of what's the best way to do it. If you think you're just going back to hybrid, hybrid means so many different things, and there's so many opportunities. Thinking about what type of hybrid and what are the pros and the cons of each.
That's a good point. Okay, so when you had all these use cases, all the different companies that you looked at and analyzed, do you have some prominent example for success, or maybe also for failure? I mean, you're saying that actually we are right now at the beginning of this whole process, so failure might be a little bit far-fetched, right? Because maybe you cannot already say that they failed, but still, like some where you see, like some examples where you say, okay, they are going in, from your perspective, for what you can see at least, in a good direction. For some where you can see, okay, they might really have trouble in the long run.
Yeah, so there are countless, really interesting examples in the book. Also, if you go to my website, www.profkane.com, before the book came out, before and after the book came out, we did a series of profiles in pandemic leadership that was published in the Wall Street Journal. And I have those all linked on my website, because there were so many inspiring and interesting stories that it was hard. We just couldn't fit it all in the book and do them all justice. So we pulled those out, and we have separate profiles. Some that come to mind. One company that really did an amazing job was Hilton. Hilton experienced a 90% decrease in demand over the course at the beginning days of the pandemic. I mean, how does any organization respond to that? Well, what Hilton did was they knew they were going to have to lay people off. They had no choice. But what they did was they took their digital hiring platform and reversed it, and partnered with companies like Amazon and UPS and grocery stores, and the companies that were experiencing the massive uptick in demand that they were having trouble keeping up with. And they created a system by which good Hilton employees could have preferential treatment and apply for these jobs at the Amazons, the UPSs, et cetera, and did so very quickly. And so the benefits for the Amazons of the world is they got high quality help in a very short period of time. The benefit for Hilton is they did right by their employees, and their logic was, if we treat employees well, when this demand shifts back, they're going to be more willing to return. And in fact, they have seen that. And Hilton was actually voted the number 3 best place to work in America, despite having laid off 50,000 people. And a lot of the reasons people said it was such a great place to work was through this effort that they did it. To really, they treated their employees with humanity, and their employees sort of rewarded them for that. And again, they had the digital platform in place, which they had not intended to use it for this purpose, but because they had shifted this to digital, the recruiting platform bring people in, they could just switch it up and really use it to bring people out of the organization as well. Another really interesting example was the sportswear company Fanatics. So they run most of the big sports branding companies, I think globally. So in summer of 2020, they said this is going to be an opportunity for us. There's going to be a lot of mergers and acquisitions opportunity. We want to move into this aggressively. They raised $350 million on a $6 billion valuation in summer of 2020. Went through that round in a flurry. And then in summer of 2021, raised another $350 million on a $13 billion valuation. So they had gone up, their valuation had doubled as a result of their innovation. Now, what we don't have a lot of are failure stories, because quite frankly, when you're going to interview people, they don't want to talk about their failures. They don't want to publish in a book like, we really screwed this up. So yes, in our book, there is a definite bias towards the success stories. The companies that I would say that will be failures are those that think they can come back out of the pandemic and things are going to return to exactly the way it was in, January of 2020 before all of this started. Because I think there are those that are out there. And I think those that are not having the conversations about what their organization is going to look like going forward, the inertia is going to take over and they're going to just slide back to where things were pre-pandemic. And I think those are the ones that are going to suffer for the long term, because there are plenty of those who aren't going to go back to that way, and they're going to be nimbler, leaner, stronger, more agile, and those are the ones that are going to thrive in the next 3 to 5 years of innovation and disruption.
But do you see actually companies thinking that way? I mean, have you realized companies really thinking that nothing might change, that it all will just be the same again when we come back? Because I mean, for me, I'm very much in the innovation space. We are working all the time with innovative new products. So maybe I'm a little bit biased on that front as well, that I just see people all the time trying to figure out new things and how we can create new products and new services, etc. around it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are a lot of other people.
I think they are out there. I think anybody that is not sort of actively thinking about how they're going to innovate in the coming years are going to inertia is going to draw them back. So they're not going to say, oh, we're just going to go back to the way things were. But I think if they're not actively thinking about how to come out of the pandemic in a more innovative way, it is going to just suck back to that. I think there are a lot of senior executives at companies that just want things to go back to where they could see employees all the time because they knew how to manage in that situation. I think higher ed, I really hoped, so my own industry, I had really hoped that higher ed institutions who were radically in need of digital transformation in some level would use this as an opportunity. And yet I've seen around the globe higher ed institutions just sliding back into the old way. They desperately want to get back into that old way of doing things because that's where their business model is built, and they're not equipped to and not willing to sort of say, okay, how do we leverage this to create something new and different? And I think, unfortunately, there are going to be a surprising number of companies that just want to do everything they can to get back to 2019. And I think a lot of them are going to be successful at doing it, and it's going to hurt their long-term viability as an organization.
Maybe there's also a lot of wishful thinking, right? That people just cannot accept this fact.
I don't think they say... I don't think they say, ooh, let me take my organization back to the Stone Ages because, I want my organization to atrophy and die. I think it is this Pollyannish thinking of, if we just will it, we can get back to where we were. And I don't see that being possible and staying strategically relevant for the future. Because in my interviews, a lot of what of people I talked to said it really didn't change their trajectory as an organization. It just accelerated it. What we thought was going to be a 5 to 10 year plan turned into a 5 to 10 month plan. And so those companies that sort of say, okay, we've just been able to realize our future and now we need to reload for the next stage, I think are those that are going to be successful. But those that have just seen the pandemic as something to weather, and I think those are going to be the ones that struggle.
Yeah, and I'm sure
But it's not. The good news is it's not too late. I think it's the real challenge is still coming. So if you have not had these conversations, Omicron in some ways was a blessing. It's punted that need for a decision down the road a little bit more, given more of a gradual transmission. And so it's not too late to have these conversations and say, what can my organization learn from the pandemic, and how can that make us into a stronger company going forward and a more innovative company going forward?
Yeah, I think to some extent it's also mindset criterion, right? I mean, how open do you are to disruption or innovation in general, and as a company, and how much you would like to go this way or not. And I think one thing that I've seen also is that, like many companies might have had plans all the time to change platforms, to innovate, to go digital in a much bigger extent, but the decisions were laid off to a later time. And then the pandemic hit, and maybe this is the reason why you say also that this all got stretched down, because the thoughts that they anyway had in the past, they said, okay, now we just have to do it. We cannot wait anymore to the next quarter, and again the next quarter, and again the next quarter. We just have to act now, right?
That's exactly what happened, I think, is we know we've had to go in this direction. The pandemic was the trigger that said, okay, and we're going to do it now. But I totally agree. And in fact, a huge theme of both of our books was the importance of mindset. And when I go in and talk to organizations, that shift in mindset is perhaps the biggest thing I'm trying to accomplish. Because in data in our first book, we actually asked companies. So we surveyed 20,000 executives globally and interviewed some 200 for both books. And what we asked is this was pre-pandemic survey. Will your organization be in a stronger or a weaker position going forward, and why? And those that said they were going to be in a weaker position going forward said it was going to be as a result of market forces. So, and those that said, like, the competition's just going to get to us. Those that said we were going to be in a stronger position said that we're going to be able to develop the skills and capabilities necessary to compete in that world. And it reminded me of the work of the Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck, who talks about growth mindset. And I saw this played out at the organizational level. She said people with a fixed mindset are those who think that success or failure is largely innate, or talent is largely innate. And so success or failure has to do with the environmental conditions. And those are the people that said, we're going to be weaker because of competition. It's going to happen to us. Those with a growth mindset, and those are the people that she says are more successful, are those that come in and say, my skills are as a result of my hard work and effort, and therefore success or failure is going to be largely how much work I put into making that happen. And those are the companies that says we're going to be stronger because we're going to be able to do the work necessary to make that happen. And so you hear fixed mindset statements all the time. We're not a digital company. We're a legacy company. I'm not a tech person. Those are all fixed mindset statements, as opposed to, my hope is, if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it's that this crisis that we've lived through shows many of those previous fixed mindset companies that they can be a digital company, that they can pivot and innovate, that they can do things well. Not perfectly, it was not seamless, of course, but we can make it happen so we can still be stronger going forward. If we can make that mindset shift and keep that mindset shift, I do think it's going to benefit companies in the long run. Because most companies, I would argue, as far as digital transformation, went into the pandemic about 10 years behind. They didn't do 10 years of innovation. They did 10 years of catching up to where they needed to be. And now the trick is, can they lock those things in?
I mean, the organizational and culture part is something that I think the first book is very much centered upon, right? That you have written that you need this mindset, organizational structure, let's say, in a company. And another aspect that I've seen also is, I think in order to get there, or this is one of the points that you make, that you need certain personalities that drive this kind of innovation in an organization. Can you expand a little bit more on this part? Like, what kind of personalities do you need there? What kind of skill set do they have to have, these digital heroes, let's say, to be the driving force in the company?
Yeah, so, and that's sort of what my ongoing research is looking at. Sort of, in the first book, we have this concept, or one of the sets of advice we give is start with a coalition of the willing. That there are people in your organization, in all organizations, that are interested in innovating, are interested in driving change. It's probably, let's call it 25% of the organization, and it's about finding those people. And in another set of research for another company, we talked about these as digital heroes. And these are the people that are innovative and willing to take risks and entrepreneurial. So I'm the faculty director of our entrepreneurship center at Boston College. And the focus there is we're not necessarily trying to get people to start companies, but we are trying to get everyone to develop this entrepreneurial mindset. I interviewed Eric Ries as part of this research, the author of a book called The Lean Startup, and several others. So he's like one of the real innovation guys. And he said, whenever you are dealing with uncertainty, you're doing a startup whether you like it or not. And so it's that mindset of being able to deal with uncertainty, whether it's the big uncertainty of COVID, whether it's the smaller uncertainty of what the next 3 to 5 years are going to look like, or other uncertainties of all the disruptions we experienced over the last 2 years. All of that requires a good entrepreneurial mindset.
I definitely agree. An entrepreneurial mindset and being able to adapt in times of disruption is something that is not just important if you build a business, but also beyond. And that's it for the first part of our conversation with Dr. Gerald Kane. Thank you all for listening to our podcast. Hope this episode has helped to give you a better understanding on the topic of digital transformation and continuous disruption. In the next part, we'll get more practical on the whole topic. We'll talk about different forms of disruption, decision making, and the right investment strategies for digital preparedness. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues and follow Amplifyre on LinkedIn for more updates.